Before I even began working on the Highline Special guitar, my goal for the project was to end up with a finish that would be a glossy mirror-like top coat. That's common on so many guitars that you see in music stores. And I know that's what a lot of people like. But even as I was polishing out the finish, I kept hearing this voice in the back of my head that was saying, go with a hand-rubbed tung oil finish. It would look so much better. Now at this stage I'd already put on about 5 or 6 coats of varnish. So if I was going to do a tung oil finish, I was going to have to stop and strip off that varnish and resand the body, and then finally put on probably 5 to 6 coats of tung oil. So in the end, after several sleepless nights of debating in my mind what I should do, I decided to go ahead and take apart the guitar, strip off all the varnish, and then restain it and apply the hand-rubbed tung oil finish. I use Clean Strip Stripper to remove the varnish. This stuff works great for removing varnish or paint without damaging the underlying wood. Brush the surface of the wood with a liberal coat of the stripper. Wait for about 15 minutes and watch as it bubbles up. Then scrape off the finish using a plastic scraper. Never use metal as it can scratch the wood. You may have to do a couple of coats of the stripper to remove all of the varnish, and what remains you can easily sand off with 100 grit paper working up to 220 grit paper. After sanding to 220 grit, I re-stained the wood with some oil-based stain. I also took this opportunity to glue on some figured maple veneer to the back of the headstock in order to cover up the scarf joint. There are basically 2 kinds of tung oils that you can use to finish your guitar. There's 100% pure tung oil, and then there's polymerized tung oil, which contains additives to make it dry faster and look glossier. The choice is up to you. I prefer the 100% pure tung oil because I like the way it looks. To apply it, pour a liberal amount onto the wood and then spread it around with a clean cloth until you've got the surface completely saturated and consistently wet. Tung oil does a wonderful job of really enhancing wood grain. After 3 or 4 coats, it also has the added benefit of waterproofing the surface. And nothing feels better than a guitar neck that's been sealed with tung oil. After you've wiped on that first coat of tung oil, and each subsequent coat for that matter, you want to make sure that the surface is completely saturated in the oil. It should look wet. The tung oil should be allowed to penetrate the wood for about 40 minutes. Then you'll want to go back with a clean cloth and wipe off the excess. It takes about 24 hours for each coat of tung oil to dry. I plan to put about 5 to 6 coats on, so I'll need about a week, adding 1 coat each day. Each coat is added exactly the same way as the first coat was added. You apply it on thick, let it sit for about 40 minutes, and then wipe off the excess. Then let it dry for another 24 hours. After the tung oil has been allowed to dry for 24 hours, we're ready to add the second coat. However, before we do this, I highly recommend that you inspect the surface for any flaws such as scratches or dings that can be sanded out with 220 grit sandpaper. Before wiping on the second coat of tung oil, I'll rub down the surface of the wood with some fine steel wool to give it just enough tooth for the oil to soak into the wood. Make sure you wipe down the wood thoroughly with a clean rag to remove any residue left by the steel wool. The second and each subsequent coat of tung oil is applied exactly the same way as the first. Pour on a liberal amount and spread it around with a clean cloth. After applying each coat of oil, the guitar will need to sit for about 40 minutes to let the oil soak into the wood. After letting the oil soak in for about 40 minutes, we want to go back and gently wipe the surface with a clean cloth in order to distribute the oil evenly. We don't want to wipe off too much of it. We still want to keep a nice glossy sheen. Here's a close-up of how the wood should look after wiping it down. The reason why we apply 5 to 6 coats of tung oil to the wood is because tung oil has a tendency to really soak into the wood. And the reason for that is because the pores in the wood are not consistently distributed. Even if we put on a grain sealer or a grain filler, which is supposed to help the finish go on consistently, tung oil really penetrates, so it's not going to matter. For that reason, I found it works best to apply about 5 to 6 coats. But once you get to that 5th and 6th coat, you'll begin to notice that the finish is laying down nice and consistently, and you're getting an even overall sheen, and that's what you're looking for. Once you've achieved this, you can allow the finish to dry for about 48 hours and then go back and using a clean cloth and some furniture polish, you can polish out the surface to a nice, even, consistent sheen.